At 7:42 a.m. on June 8, 1944, Staff Sergeant Robert "Red" Morrison crouched behind a hedgerow wall 300 yards from a German bunker in Normandy, France, watching Private First Class James O'Connor check the fuse on their homemade device. The device looked like something a mechanic had cobbled together in a junkyard. 6 welded 88mm shell casings arranged in a hexagonal pattern, mounted on a salvaged German ammunition cart. Captain Harding's words kept echoing in Morrison's head. Tin can bomb. Court-martial if this fails. 4 previous attempts to destroy this bunker. 4 dead engineers. 18 seconds of exposure under MG-42 fire. That was the math Morrison couldn't escape. Morrison and O'Connor had 18 seconds to push 160 pounds of improvised explosives across open ground, while German machine gunners tried to kill them. The bunker had pinned down B Company for 14 hours. Every soldier in that company was counting on Morrison's contraption working. Every soldier knew the previous 4 engineers who'd tried to destroy this position had died trying. Morrison could see the German machine gun barrel protruding from the 6-inch firing slit. Could see the morning fog providing limited visibility, maybe 100 yards. His hands gripped the cart handles, slick with sweat despite the June chill. O'Connor's face was pale, 19 years old. Pittsburgh kid, same as Morrison. The calculation ran through Morrison's mind one more time. 18 seconds exposed with partial cover versus 12 seconds exposed with 0 cover. Standard Satchel charge doctrine said 12 seconds. Morrison's method said 18, 6 seconds longer under fire. But the cart provided cover, and the hexagonal bomb would actually collapse the bunker instead of just damaging it. Morrison gave the signal. They pushed forward into the fog. The first 4 days after D-Day had turned into a tactical nightmare for American combat engineers. June 4th to June 8th, 1944. American forces were advancing inland from Omaha and Utah beaches, pushing through the hedgerow country of Normandy. Ancient stone farmhouses stood every 200 to 400 yards. The Germans had converted these farmhouses into reinforced defensive positions. Wall specifications were brutal, 3 feet thick. Limestone and granite construction, built in the 1600s and 1700s. These structures had been designed to withstand medieval siege weapons. Now they were perfect for modern warfare. Each bunker featured MG-42 machine gun positions, 6-inch firing slits, interlocking fields of fire. 5 Germans could hold a position against 200 Americans indefinitely. The mathematics of defensive warfare favored the defenders so completely that American advances had stalled across the entire sector. Standard infantry tactics failed. Direct assault produced a 43% casualty rate across the 37th Combat Engineer Battalion sector. 43%. Nearly half of every attacking force became casualties before reaching the objective. Artillery strikes wasted ammunition on structures that shrugged off high explosives. 155mm shells created impressive craters but rarely penetrated 3-foot walls. One bunker took 47 direct artillery hits over 6 hours, remained operational. The German machine gun kept firing. American soldiers kept dying. Tank support offered no solution. Hedgerows blocked Sherman movement. Tanks that tried to maneuver around the ancient field boundaries exposed themselves to German Panzerfaust teams. Burning Shermans littered the Norman countryside. The standard engineer solution was satchel charges, 40 pounds of TNT packed in a canvas bag. The procedure was simple and suicidal. An engineer had to approach to within 15 feet of the target. Place the charge against the wall. Light a 30-second fuse. Sprint back to cover. Total exposure time ranged from 8 to 12 seconds depending on terrain. 8 to 12 seconds in the open while German machine gunners shot at you. The 37th Combat Engineer Battalion kept statistics. June 4th through 7th, 1944. 12 bunkers targeted. 18 engineers killed, 23 engineers wounded. 3 bunkers successfully destroyed. 9 bunkers remained operational. The mathematics were devastating. Satchel charge team survival rate was 21%. 4 out of 5 engineers who attempted to destroy these bunkers became casualties. The MG-42 machine gun was the primary killer. Specifications were terrifying. 1,200 rounds per minute. Effective range 1,000 yards. Average time for a German gunner to acquire a target was 1.4 seconds. Average sustained burst was 25 to 30 rounds. At 12 seconds exposure time, an engineer faced approximately 240 rounds. 240 bullets aimed at one man crossing open ground. The strategic impact extended beyond individual casualties. The advance toward St. Lo had completely stalled. 7-Corps timeline was 3 days behind schedule. Each bunker held up 1 infantry company. Companies ranged from 120 to 200 men. 9 operational bunkers equaled 9 companies immobilized. Approximately 1,500 American soldiers pinned down by an estimated 45 to 60 German defenders across 9 positions. The force multiplication ratio was obscene. 1 German equaled 25 to 30 Americans immobilized. Command pressure kept increasing. General Bradley was demanding a breakthrough within 48 hours. June 7th evening. Morrison sat outside the battalion aid station watching medics load Corporal William Chen's body into an ambulance. Chen was the 3rd engineer. Morrison had lost in 2 days. Morrison had trained Chen. Had worked with him in North Africa and Sicily. Chen had died carrying a satchel charge across 40 feet of open ground. Made it 28 feet before an MG-42 burst cut him down. The charge detonated 12 feet from the target wall, created an impressive crater, damaged nothing structural. The bunker kept firing. Morrison's role now was writing a letter to Chen's mother in Sacramento. This would be his 3rd letter in 3 days. Previous letters went to Private David Morrison's family on June 5th. No relation, just unfortunate shared surname. Sergeant Robert Hayes's family on June 6th. Morrison used the same formula for every letter. Your son died bravely. He was serving his country. His death was quick. He didn't suffer. All lies. Chen had taken 11 seconds to die, screaming. 40 feet from American lines, nobody could reach him because the German machine gun was still firing. German gunners had learned to wound American soldiers in the open. Wounded men screamed. Screaming men attracted rescue attempts. Rescue attempts produced more targets. More targets meant more kills. The Germans were efficient. Morrison's anger wasn't directed at the Germans. They were soldiers following their training, defending their positions. Morrison's anger targeted the tactical doctrine that kept killing his men. The problem wasn't courage. American engineers had courage in abundance. The problem wasn't training. Every engineer knew exactly what to do. The problem was physics. Men carrying explosives cannot cross open ground against machine guns. The survival rate proved it. 21%. Morrison needed a different delivery method. Something that provided cover during approach. Something that guaranteed structural collapse instead of cosmetic damage. Something that didn't require engineers to sprint across open ground, carrying 40 pounds while German gunners shot at them. Morrison stood. Walked toward the salvage depot. Time to break some regulations. The salvage depot sat 200 yards behind American lines. Piles of destroyed equipment filled half an acre. Panzers with blown tracks, half-tracks with punctured fuel tanks, artillery pieces with cracked barrels. the detritus of modern warfare. Most soldiers saw junk. Morrison saw raw materials. He was looking for something specific: German 88mm shell casings. The 88mm gun was Germany's most versatile weapon. Anti-tank, anti-aircraft, field artillery. Americans had captured 23 88mm positions since D-Day. Each position left hundreds of spent shell casings scattered across the battlefield. Morrison found what he needed: a pile containing 40 empty casings. Morrison picked up one casing. Cylindrical steel tube, 11 inches diameter, 31 inches long. Wall thickness, 3/8 inch hardened steel. Weight empty was 14 pounds. Morrison's mind started calculating. This casing could contain 7 pounds of TNT. Standard Satchel charge used 40 pounds TNT in a canvas bag. Problem with canvas was zero fragmentation, zero directional force. Explosion dissipated in all directions equally. Wasteful, inefficient. Steel casing would contain explosive force. Directed outward, more efficient energy transfer to target structure. But one casing with 7 pounds wasn't enough. Morrison needed the equivalent of a 40-pound satchel charge. He needed multiple casings. The question was configuration. Linear arrangement? Square pattern? Something else? Morrison grabbed 6 casings, arranged them on the ground. Tried different patterns. Line didn't work, too unstable. Square with 2 casings in center looked promising, but lacked symmetry. Then Morrison tried hexagonal. 1 casing in the center, 5 casings surrounding it. 6 total. Perfect geometry. The center casing could hold 40 pounds TNT, primary explosive. The 5 surrounding casings could be packed with mass. Rocks, concrete fragments, metal scrap. Those casings wouldn't contain additional explosive. They'd contain weight, mass that shaped the blast. Hexagonal geometry would create directional force. Blast would push outward through 6 paths. When placed against a wall, 5 casings would direct force into the structure. The 6th casing at the rear would vent explosion away from the engineers. Additional benefit was fragmentation. The surrounding casings would act as a fragmentation jacket. Mass would create secondary projectiles that increased structural damage. Morrison looked at his hexagonal arrangement. 160 pounds total when fully loaded. Too heavy for men to carry across open ground. But Morrison wasn't planning to carry it. He was planning to roll it. He needed wheels. Morrison walked through the salvage depot until he found a German ammunition cart. 2 wheels, low profile, 18 inches high. The cart had been designed for moving artillery shells from supply trucks to gun positions. Germans were efficient like that. Everything designed for specific purpose. The cart was perfect. Morrison could mount the hexagonal cluster on the cart. 2 men could push it like a wheelbarrow. 1 man behind, 1 man steadying the front. Both men crouched low behind the cart during approach. The cart itself would provide partial cover. Steel frame, wooden bed. Not armor, but better than nothing. Engineers could crouch behind the cart while pushing. Reduce their exposure to machine gun fire. When they reached the target, they'd tip the cart forward. The hexagonal bomb would roll against the bunker wall. Light the fuse, retreat behind the cart. 60-second fuse would provide plenty of time to get clear. Morrison ran the calculations in his head. Standard satchel charge approach across 300 yards of open ground took 12 seconds. His cart method would take approximately 18 seconds. 50% longer exposure time. But the cart provided cover. Reduced effective target area by 60%. The mathematics worked. 50% longer exposure minus 60% reduced target area equaled net survival advantage. Plus, the hexagonal bomb guaranteed structural collapse. Satchel charges often failed to penetrate 3-foot walls. Morrison's bomb would have 7 times the effective force due to shaped blast configuration. Morrison checked his watch. 2,100 hours. 3 hours until midnight. He needed a welder. Needed someone who could join 6 steel casings into one unit. Someone who wouldn't ask too many questions about why a staff sergeant was building improvised explosives without authorization. Morrison knew exactly who to find. Corporal Anthony Russo ran the battalion welding operation. Russo was a mechanic from Newark, expert welder. Italian-American kid who understood that sometimes regulations needed bending. Morrison found Russo working on a damaged half-track near the motor pool. Russo looked up when Morrison approached. Morrison explained what he needed. 6 88mm casings welded into hexagonal configuration. Russo examined Morrison's sketch. His expression shifted from curiosity to concern to calculation. Russo pointed out the obvious problems. The welds would fail under detonation pressure. The steel was too hard. Required preheating to achieve proper penetration. The joint strength wouldn't survive the explosive force. Morrison countered every objection. The welds didn't need to survive the explosion. They just needed to hold the casings together until detonation. The device would be destroyed in the blast anyway. Structural integrity during explosion wasn't relevant. Structural integrity during transport was the only concern. Russo studied the sketch for another 30 seconds, then looked at Morrison. "You're building a bomb that will probably kill whoever pushes it." Morrison met his eyes. "It'll definitely kill whoever carries a satchel charge. I'm playing percentages." Russo nodded. Started gathering equipment. He'd have it welded in 2 hours, completed by 2,300 hours. Morrison watched Russo work. The arc welder sparked and hissed. Blue-white light reflected off the steel casings. Each weld took approximately 4 minutes. 6 casings meant 24 minutes of actual welding, plus setup time, plus cooling time. Russo worked methodically, precise, professional. By 22:55 hours, the hexagonal cluster was complete. Morrison examined every weld joint, ran his fingers along each seam. Solid, strong enough for transport. That was all he needed. He loaded the empty cluster onto the ammunition cart, tested the weight distribution. Stable. Tomorrow morning, he'd fill the center casing with 40 pounds TNT. Fill the surrounding casings with rocks and concrete. Then he'd find out if Captain Harding would authorize a field test or if Morrison would face court-martial for unauthorized weapons experimentation. Either way, Morrison was done watching engineers die carrying satchel charges. Done writing letters to mothers. Done accepting 21% survival rates. Tomorrow morning at 0700 hours, Morrison would push his tin can bomb across 300 yards of open ground toward a German bunker. He'd prove his mathematics were correct, or he'd die trying. Robert Morrison was 32 years old when he built his first improvised bomb in Normandy. Born in 1912 in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. His father worked the steel mills. His mother was a seamstress. Morrison started working at the U.S. Steel Mill at age 16 in 1928. 1 year later, the Depression hit, and half the mill workers lost their jobs. Morrison kept his because he understood structural engineering. He was self-taught, borrowed books from the Carnegie Library, books about physics, metallurgy, blast furnace construction. By 1940, Morrison was a crew chief for controlled demolition projects. He understood the physics of explosive force, understood structural collapse and material stress points, understood that steel beams failed at predictable loads and concrete crumbled at specific pressures. This knowledge would save lives in ways Morrison couldn't imagine when he was just a Pittsburgh steelworker trying to keep his job during the Depression. Morrison enlisted in December 1942 at age 30. The Army assigned him to Combat Engineers with specialization in demolitions. It was a perfect fit. Basic training at Fort Belvoir, Virginia. Morrison finished top of his class in explosives handling. Not because he was naturally gifted, because he treated every demolition problem like an engineering problem. Calculate the variables, optimize the solution, execute with precision. The Army shipped Morrison to North Africa in February 1943. The Tunisia campaign was his introduction to German defensive tactics. He cleared minefields, destroyed pillboxes, learned that German engineers were methodical and professional. They built defenses that required careful analysis to defeat. Morrison studied every German position he encountered, measured wall thickness, examined firing angles, calculated blast requirements. Sicily campaign started in July 1943. Morrison's squad conducted 47 demolition missions, 0 casualties, 47 missions without losing a single man. Other squads lost men regularly. Morrison's squad came home intact every time. Why? Morrison calculated blast requirements precisely, minimized exposure time, never sent his men into situations where the mathematics predicted failure. The Army promoted Morrison to staff sergeant in August 1943. By then he had developed a reputation. The engineer who brought his men home alive. His method was simple. Careful planning, precise execution. Never waste explosives, never waste lives. Morrison believed that most combat deaths resulted from poor tactical planning. Command treated engineers as expendable, acceptable losses for objective completion. Morrison disagreed fundamentally. Engineer deaths were tactical failures, not noble sacrifices. Morrison's approach treated each demolition mission as an engineering problem with specific variables. Target structure, explosive requirements, approach route, exposure time, cover options. Optimize all variables before mission execution. The result was a 94% survival rate across 16 months of combat. Battalion average was 67%. Morrison's squad survived at rates that command considered statistically improbable. The secret wasn't luck. The secret was mathematics. The Italy campaign took Morrison from Salerno to Anzio. More demolition missions, more German defenses. Morrison's reputation grew. Other squad leaders started asking for his advice. How do you keep your men alive? Morrison always gave the same answer. Treat it like an engineering problem. Calculate the risks. Optimize the approach. Don't send men into situations where the mathematics predict death. But Normandy changed everything. The hedgerow bunkers were different from anything Morrison had encountered in North Africa or Italy. These structures were older, built in the 1600s and 1700s. 3 feet of limestone and granite. Walls that had stood for 300 years, walls that had been designed to withstand medieval siege weapons. Standard tactics weren't working. Morrison's squad lost 3 men in 4 days. For Morrison, that was unacceptable tactical failure. He'd promised these men he'd bring them home. Every squad leader made that promise. Most couldn't keep it. Morrison had kept his promise for 16 months. 94% survival rate. Now he'd lost 3 men in 4 days. Chen, Hayes, Morrison. The names burned in his mind. 3 letters to write. 3 families to notify. 3 failures. Morrison's calculations had been wrong. The Normandy bunkers required different mathematics. Time to recalculate. June 7th, 2100 hours. Morrison walked through the captured German equipment yard behind American lines. Searchlights illuminated piles of destroyed materiel, panzers with blown tracks, half-tracks with punctured fuel tanks, artillery pieces with cracked barrels. The salvage depot was where broken German equipment came to die. Most soldiers saw junk. Morrison saw raw materials. He was looking for something specific. German 88mm shell casings. The 88mm gun was Germany's most versatile weapon. Anti-tank, anti-aircraft, field artillery. The Germans used it everywhere. Americans had captured 23 88mm positions since D-Day. Each position left hundreds of spent shell casings scattered across the battlefield. Morrison found what he needed: a pile containing 40 empty casings. Morrison picked up one casing, cylindrical steel tube, 11 inches in diameter, 31 inches long, wall thickness 3/8 inch hardened steel. Weight empty was 14 pounds. Morrison's mind immediately started calculating. This casing could contain 7 pounds of TNT. Standard Satchel charge used 40 pounds TNT packed in a canvas bag. The problem with canvas was zero fragmentation and zero directional force. The explosion dissipated in all directions equally. Wasteful, inefficient. A steel casing would contain the explosive force, directed outward. More efficient energy transfer to the target structure. But one casing with 7 pounds wasn't enough. Morrison needed the equivalent of a 40-pound satchel charge. He needed multiple casings. The question was configuration. Morrison grabbed 6 casings, started arranging them on the ground, tried different patterns. Linear arrangement was unstable. Square pattern with 2 casings in the center lacked symmetry. Then Morrison tried hexagonal. 1 casing in the center, 5 casings surrounding it in a ring. 6 total. The geometry was perfect. The center casing would hold 40 pounds of TNT, primary explosive. The 5 surrounding casings would be packed with mass. Rocks, concrete fragments, metal scrap, anything with weight. These surrounding casings wouldn't contain explosive. They'd contain mass that shaped the blast. Hexagonal geometry would create directional force. The blast would push outward through 6 paths. When placed against a wall, 5 casings would direct force into the structure. The 6th casing at the rear would vent the explosion away from the engineers. Additional benefit was fragmentation. The surrounding casings would act as a fragmentation jacket. The mass inside would create secondary projectiles that increased structural damage. Morrison had just invented a shaped charge using salvaged German artillery casings. The irony wasn't lost on him. German steel would destroy German bunkers. But Morrison had a problem. The hexagonal cluster would weigh 160 pounds when fully loaded. Too heavy for men to carry across open ground. Carrying 40 pounds in a satchel was difficult enough. 160 pounds required 4 men. 4 men presented 4 targets. 4 men moved slowly. 4 men couldn't take cover. Morrison wasn't planning to carry his bomb. He was planning to roll it. He needed wheels. Morrison walked through the salvage depot until he found a German ammunition cart. 2 wheels, low profile, 18 inches high. The cart had been designed for moving artillery shells from supply trucks to gun positions. German efficiency. Everything built for specific purpose. The cart's dimensions were perfect for Morrison's hexagonal cluster. Morrison could mount the bomb on the cart. 2 men could push it like a wheelbarrow. 1 man behind providing forward force. 1 man at the front steadying and guiding. Both men crouched low behind the cart during the approach. The cart itself would provide partial cover. Steel frame, wooden bed, not armor. But better than nothing. Engineers could crouch behind the cart while pushing across open ground, reduce their exposure to machine gun fire. When they reached the target, they'd tip the cart forward. The hexagonal bomb would roll against the bunker wall. Light a 60-second fuse, retreat behind the cart. Plenty of time to get clear. The cart would provide cover during retreat too. Morrison was starting to believe this might actually work. But first, he needed a welder. Morrison needed to weld 6 casings together into one permanent assembly. The battalion had one arc welder assigned to vehicle repair. Morrison found Corporal Anthony Russo working on a damaged half-track near the motor pool. Russo was a mechanic from Newark, expert welder, Italian-American kid who understood that sometimes regulations needed bending. Morrison explained what he needed. 6 88mm casings welded into a hexagonal configuration. Russo examined Morrison's sketch. His expression shifted from curiosity to concern to calculation. Russo immediately saw the problems. The welds would fail under detonation pressure. The steel was too hard, required preheating to achieve proper penetration. The joint strength wouldn't survive the explosive force. Morrison countered every objection. The welds didn't need to survive the explosion. They just needed to hold the casings together until detonation. The device would be destroyed in the blast anyway. Structural integrity during explosion wasn't relevant. Structural integrity during transport was the only concern. Russo studied the sketch for 30 seconds, then looked directly at Morrison. "You're building a bomb that will probably kill whoever pushes it." Morrison met his eyes without blinking. "It'll definitely kill whoever carries a satchel charge." "I'm playing percentages." Russo nodded, started gathering his welding equipment. He'd have it completed in 2 hours, done by 2300 hours, June 7th. Morrison watched Russo work. The arc welder sparked and hissed. Blue-white light reflected off the steel casings, creating strange shadows in the darkness. Each weld took approximately 4 minutes. 6 casings meant multiple welds per joint. Russo worked methodically, precise, professional, no wasted motion. By 22:55 hours, the hexagonal cluster was complete. Morrison examined every weld joint, ran his fingers along each seam, solid, strong enough for transport. That was all he needed. Morrison loaded the empty cluster onto the ammunition cart, tested the weight distribution, stable. The cart's wheels supported the frame without buckling. Tomorrow morning, Morrison would fill the center casing with 40 pounds of TNT. Fill the surrounding casings with rocks and concrete fragments. Then he'd find out if Captain Harding would authorize a field test. Morrison test-loaded the cart with sandbags to simulate the full's weight, 160 pounds. He pushed the cart across 50 yards of muddy ground behind American lines. Timed himself with his watch. 18 seconds. Standard satchel charge approach across the same distance took 12 seconds. Morrison's method was 6 seconds slower, 50% longer exposure time. But the cart provided cover, reduced the effective target area by approximately 60%. Morrison ran the mathematics in his head. 50% longer exposure time minus 60% reduced target area equaled net survival advantage. Plus, the hexagonal bomb guaranteed structural collapse. Satchel charges had a 79% failure rate against these 3-foot walls. Even when they detonated, they often failed to penetrate deep enough to cause structural damage. Morrison's bomb would have 7 times the effective force due to the shaped blast configuration. The mathematics supported the theory. Time to test the theory in combat. Morrison presented his device to Captain Douglas Harding at 23:30 hours on June 7th. Harding was in the command tent reviewing maps when Morrison wheeled the hexagonal bomb inside. Harding looked up from his maps, stared at the device for 5 seconds, then asked the obvious question. "What the hell is that?" Morrison explained. "Hexagonal cluster bomb. Shaped charge principle. Cart delivery system. 40 pounds of TNT in the center casing. 5 surrounding casings packed with mass to direct the blast. The cart provides mobile cover during approach. 2 men can push it. Total exposure time, 18 seconds. Guaranteed structural collapse of target." Harding walked around the device, examined it from multiple angles. His expression was skeptical. "It looks like something a kid built in his garage." Morrison kept his voice level. "It'll collapse a bunker. Guaranteed." Harding shook his head. "Your guarantee means nothing. This violates every demolition protocol in the Engineer Field Manual." The Engineer Field Manual specified Satchel charges, tested equipment, approved procedures, established doctrine. Morrison's device was improvised, untested, unauthorized. Harding made his position clear. "You want to risk 2 men on experimental garbage?" Morrison responded immediately. "Versus guaranteed death on Satchel charges?" "Yes, sir." Harding called for Lieutenant Paul Chen, battalion demolitions officer. Chen had an engineering degree from Berkeley, actually understood blast physics beyond field manual doctrine. Chen arrived within 5 minutes, examined Morrison's device, listened to Morrison's explanation, then provided his analysis. Chen's calculation identified multiple problems. The hexagonal configuration would create unpredictable blast vectors. The explosion might focus into the target, as Morrison predicted, or it might blow back toward the engineers. The welded joints were potential failure points. If the welds failed during detonation, the casings would become shrapnel directed at the mine operators. Chen's recommendation was unambiguous. "Don't use this. Too many unknowns. Too dangerous." Morrison had anticipated this objection, had his counter-argument ready. Satchel charges have a 79% failure rate against these bunkers. Known dangerous versus unknown dangerous? I'll take unknown. Chen started to respond, but Morrison continued. "We've lost 18 men in 4 days using approved doctrine. 18 funerals. How many more before we try something different?" Morrison's own squad questioned the plan. Sergeant Thomas Bailey was the most vocal. "We're supposed to push this across open ground? While they shoot at us?" Private O'Connor added his concern. "At least with Satchel charges you can run. That cart forces walking speed. You're committed. No sprint, no evasion." Morrison acknowledged their concerns, didn't dismiss them. "You're right. It's slower, 6 seconds slower than Satchel charges. But you're behind cover the entire time, and this will actually work. It'll collapse the bunker. Satchel charges just create craters. This creates structural failure." Morrison volunteered himself and O'Connor for the first test. Bailey immediately objected. "If it fails, we lose our squad leader." Morrison's response was characteristic. "If it works, we stop losing engineers. 1 test, 1 bunker, then we know." Captain Harding listened to the entire debate, watched Morrison defend his innovation against every objection. Finally, Harding made his decision: 1 test mission. The target would be the bunker that had killed 4 engineers, the bunker that had pinned down B Company for 14 hours, the bunker that represented everything wrong with current tactics. Harding's conditions were strict. Morrison would take full responsibility. If the device failed, Morrison would face court-martial for wasting materials and conducting unauthorized weapons experimentation. Military regulations prohibited improvised explosives. Morrison's hexagonal bomb violated multiple articles of the field manual. Harding was risking his own career by authorizing the test. If Morrison's bomb killed American engineers, Harding would face questions from battalion command. Morrison accepted the terms without hesitation. Timeline was set for morning of June 8th at 0700 hours. Morrison and O'Connor would push the tin can bomb across 300 yards of open ground. German machine gunners would try to kill them. Either the bunker would collapse or Morrison's career would end. Possibly his life would end too. But Morrison had done the mathematics. The percentages favored survival. Better odds than Satchel charges. Better odds than doing nothing while more engineers died. Morrison spent the rest of the night preparing. Filled the center casing with 40 pounds of TNT. Filled the 5 surrounding casings with concrete fragments and steel scrap. Installed a 60-second fuse. Double length compared to standard 30-second fuses. More time to retreat. More margin for error. Checked every weld joint one more time. Greased the cart wheels. Reinforced the cart frame with additional steel straps. Everything had to be perfect. One chance. One test. Success meant doctrine change. Failure meant court-martial. O'Connor found Morrison at 0300 hours still working on the bomb. O'Connor was 19 years old. From Pittsburgh's South Side. Same city as Morrison. Same working-class background. O'Connor had volunteered for the test because Morrison had kept him alive through Sicily and Italy. Kept the entire squad alive when other squads lost men regularly. O'Connor trusted Morrison's calculations even when command didn't. Morrison looked up from his work. "You don't have to do this. I can find someone else." O'Connor shook his head. "You trained me. You kept me alive this long. I'm going." Morrison nodded. Didn't argue. Went back to checking the fuse mechanism one more time. 0700 hours would come fast. 3.5 hours until they pushed forward. 3.5 hours until they found out if Morrison's mathematics were correct, or if they'd die, proving his theory was wrong. Morrison woke at 0530 on June 8th, 1944. He hadn't slept. Spent the entire night checking calculations and reviewing the approach route. Weather forecast predicted morning fog with visibility reduced to 100 yards until 0800 hours. Perfect conditions. Fog would provide concealment during the approach. Morrison and O'Connor met at the assembly area at 0615 hours. O'Connor was 19 years old. From Pittsburgh's South Side. Same neighborhood as Morrison. Same working-class background. O'Connor's hands were shaking while loading the hexagonal bomb onto the cart. Morrison inspected each weld joint one final time. All solid. The center casing held 40 pounds of TNT with a double-length fuse. 60 seconds instead of the standard 30. Longer fuse meant more retreat time. The 5 surrounding casings were packed with concrete chunks and steel fragments. Total weight was 163 pounds. 3 pounds over Morrison's original calculation, but still manageable. The cartwheels were greased. Axle reinforced with steel strap. Everything ready. Captain Harding gathered officers at 0700 hours for final briefing. Morrison explained the plan. Push the cart during fog cover. Approach the bunker from 270 degrees west. The adjacent bunker couldn't provide supporting fire without risking shooting their own position. Timeline was 31 seconds to cover 300 yards. Morrison's calculation included the mud factor. Tip the cart at the wall. Light the fuse. Retreat behind the cart for cover. The 60-second fuse would allow a 200-foot retreat. Detonation should collapse the west wall and neutralize the position. Harding made the stakes clear. This works. Morrison's a hero. This fails. Morrison's court-martialed. At 0742 hours, Morrison and O'Connor positioned themselves behind a hedgerow 300 yards from the target. Fog was thick. Visibility 80 yards. Better than forecast. Artillery began suppressing fire. 155mm shells impacting 400 yards beyond the bunker. Germans returned fire with MG-42 bursts aimed at American infantry positions. Morrison looked at O'Connor. On 3. Steady push. Don't stop. Don't look up. Count. 1, 2, 3. They pushed. The cart rolled smoothly for the first 50 yards. Slight downslope. Firm ground. O'Connor behind the cart providing forward force. Morrison steadying the front. Both men crouched low. 8 seconds elapsed. No German fire yet. Fog concealment was working. At 70 yards the ground softened. Mud from previous day's rain. Cart wheels sank 3 inches. Resistance increased. Morrison felt the weight shift. Bomb tilting right. O'Connor adjusted and centered the weight. At 92 yards from start, the German MG-42 opened fire. Bullets cracked overhead. High shots. The gunner was firing blind into fog. Morrison called back to O'Connor. Keep moving. Don't stop. 15 seconds elapsed. At 120 yards from start, the fog began thinning. The German gunner acquired visual contact. Sustained burst, 40 rounds. Bullets hit the cart. 2 rounds punched through the wooden bed. 1 deflected off the hexagonal bomb. The steel casing held. No penetration, no detonation. O'Connor flinched. "They're hitting it," Morrison shouted back. "Steel's holding. Push harder." The ground deteriorated into deep mud, 6-inch ruts from previous vehicle traffic. The cart bogged down. Wheels stuck. Morrison pulled from the front. O'Connor pushed from behind. Cart freed, momentum lost. Another MG-42 burst, 60 rounds. Walking fire toward the cart. 1 bullet struck O'Connor's left shoulder. Grazed. He kept moving. 23 seconds elapsed. At 200 yards from start, they were completely exposed. Fog cleared. The German gunner had clear sight picture. MG-42 fire intensified. 1,200 rounds per minute. Every 4th round, a tracer. Tracers passing 2 feet above the cart. Germans were aiming for Morrison and O'Connor's heads. Morrison ducked lower, face inches from the cart bed. He could smell cordite, fresh-cut grass, mud. At 240 yards, the cartwheel hit a rock, stopped. Morrison kicked the rock aside. O'Connor pushed. Cart rolled. At 270 yards, the adjacent bunker opened fire from the south. Crossfire. 2 MG-42s. Combined rate 2,400 rounds per minute. Bullets hitting the ground around the cart created dirt geysers. 1 round grazed Morrison's right boot. 31 seconds elapsed. Exactly Morrison's calculated time. At 295 yards, the cart reached the bunker's west wall. Morrison and O'Connor tipped the cart, forward. The hexagonal bomb rolled off and came to rest against the stone wall. Perfect placement. Center casing touching the wall. 5 surrounding casings splayed outward. Morrison pulled the fuse igniter. White smoke. Fuse burning. O'Connor was already running. 60-second countdown started. Morrison grabbed the cart and pulled it 10 feet from the wall for cover. Both men dove behind the cart. German fire continued. Bullets impacting the cart, the ground, the wall. Morrison counted. 30 seconds, 40 seconds, 50 seconds. At 56 seconds, German fire stopped. The Germans inside the bunker heard the fuse, knew what was coming, tried to evacuate. 60 seconds. The hexagonal bomb detonated. 40 pounds of TNT plus shaped charge effect. Morrison felt the shockwave. Chest compression, ears ringing despite 200-foot distance. The sound wasn't one explosion, but an overlapping sequence. Primary blast from the center casing, secondary blasts from 5 surrounding casings fragmenting. Mass projectiles hitting the wall. Orange fireball. Black smoke. Debris cloud 100 feet high. 12 feet of 3-foot-thick stone wall fell inward. Supporting beams fractured. Second floor collapsed onto first floor. Roof structure pancaked. Entire building dropped 8 feet. Secondary explosion as German ammunition storage ignited. Entire bunker consumed. Flames visible through collapsed walls. Smoke cleared after 30 seconds. The bunker was unrecognizable, transformed from defensive strongpoint to rubble pile. West wall completely gone. 15-foot breach. Interior crushed and impassable. 3 German soldiers stumbled out the eastern entrance, hands raised, surrendering. No weapons, buried in the collapse. 1 soldier had a broken arm. Another was bleeding from a head wound. The third appeared uninjured. American infantry moved forward and secured the prisoners. Bunker neutralized. 5 Germans, 3 captured. 2 killed in collapse. Captain Harding arrived at Morrison's position within 2 minutes. Examined the bunker damage through binoculars. "Jesus Christ, Morrison. You collapsed the entire structure," Morrison replied evenly. "Shaped charge, sir. Directed blast into structural weak points." Harding asked the critical question. "How many more can you build?" Morrison already had the answer. 3 more ready by 0900 hours. Need welding time." Harding didn't hesitate. "Do it. I want 3 teams. Hit 3 bunkers simultaneously." Morrison returned with O'Connor to the salvage depot at 0815 hours. Corporal Russo was already working. Word had spread. Russo looked up when Morrison arrived. "Heard your tin can bomb worked. Need more?" Morrison nodded. 3 more. 90 minutes. Russo smiled. "I'll have them ready in 60. At 0918 hours on the morning of June 8, 1944, 3 teams moved out simultaneously across the Norman hedgerow country, while artillery suppression began in earnest. 155mm shells bracketed all 3 bunkers, forcing German defenders inside and reducing both their visibility and firing capability. 3 teams pushed forward from 3 different positions, as Morrison observed from the command post alongside Captain Harding, positioned 400 yards behind the lines with binoculars tracking all 3 teams simultaneously. Bailey's team approached Bunker 2 from the northeast, with Bailey and Martinez pushing their cart across 280 yards of open ground. The German MG-42 opened fire at 140 yards with sustained bursts, and the cart took 7 hits with bullets deflecting off the steel casings. Bailey was hit in the left leg, but kept pushing, and they reached the wall in 34 seconds, just 3 seconds over Morrison's calculation. They tipped the cart, lit the fuse, and retreated. Bunker 2 detonated 61 seconds after fuse ignition. The west wall collapsed in results identical to Morrison's test, and 4 Germans surrendered as the bunker was neutralized. Davis's team faced Bunker 5 from the central approach, pushing their cart across 320 yards of longer distance that meant more exposure time. German fire came from 2 positions, Bunker 5 plus an adjacent strongpoint, creating crossfire that resulted in the cart taking 14 hits. Wilson's helmet was struck by a bullet that saved his life, though it left him dazed, but he kept moving. They reached the wall in 41 seconds, 10 seconds over calculation, due to worse ground conditions with heavy mud and vehicle ruts. They tipped the cart, lit the fuse, and retreated. Bunker 5 detonated 59 seconds after fuse ignition in a massive explosion, as the German ammunition storage proved larger than expected, and the entire bunker was destroyed with no survivors. Thompson's team approached Bunker 7 from the southwest across 295 yards, facing the lightest German fire as fog lingered in the low ground. The cart encountered an obstacle at 220 yards, a fallen tree limb, and they had to maneuver around it, losing 8 seconds. They reached the wall in 39 seconds, within acceptable parameters, tipped the cart, lit the fuse, and retreated. Bunker 7 detonated 60 seconds after fuse ignition. The south wall collapsed with partial roof collapse, and 3 Germans escaped through the rear entrance but were captured by American infantry as the bunker was neutralized. The 90-second window Morrison had planned proved sufficient, as the first detonation at Bunker 2 occurred at 09:19 hours and 34 seconds. The second detonation at Bunker 5 at 09:20 hours and 16 seconds, and the third detonation at Bunker 7 at 09:20 hours and 43 seconds. The total time from first to last explosion was 69 seconds, 21 seconds ahead of Morrison's planned schedule. The results spoke clearly. 4 bunkers destroyed in one morning, including Morrison's test, 0 American engineer fatalities, 7 Germans killed, and 10 Germans captured. The immediate tactical impact became evident at 09:30 hours when Captain Harding ordered a general advance. 3 infantry companies moved forward through the cleared positions, breaching the German defensive line across a 1,200-yard gap where no machine gun fire remained, either suppressed or destroyed. American forces advanced 2 miles by noon, the fastest advance since D-Day in this sector, putting the 7 Corps timeline back on schedule. General Bradley received a report by 1300 hours stating that the 37th Engineers had developed a new bunker clearing technique that was effective, with a request for technical specifications for distribution. The casualty comparison proved dramatic. In the previous 4 days from June 4th through 7th, 18 engineers had been killed clearing 3 bunkers. But on June 8th, 0 engineers were killed clearing 4 bunkers, representing a 100% casualty reduction. The success rate improved from 25%. 3 successes out of 12 attempts in previous operations to 100%, 4 successes out of 4 attempts on June 8th. Engineer morale transformed completely as fear was replaced by confidence, and Morrison's squad stood ready to build more bombs and clear more bunkers. The German response came swiftly as German commanders recognized the American tactical innovation within hours. Radio intercepts captured messages stating that Americans were using a new weapon, a large explosive device with wheeled delivery causing extreme structural damage that they could not withstand, with recommendations to withdraw from stone structures. The German 352nd Infantry Division began evacuating hedgerow bunkers by the evening of June 8th because stone structures had become liabilities instead of assets. The psychology reversed completely as Germans now feared the buildings that had previously provided safety, giving Americans a psychological advantage as the reputation of the tin can bomb spread faster than the device itself. Command recognition followed immediately as Captain Harding filed his report to the battalion commander, Lieutenant Colonel James Preston, who visited Morrison personally at 1600 hours on June 8th. Preston told Morrison that his innovation had saved lives and broken the stalemate, and he was recommending him for the Bronze Star while ordering immediate production of the device. Morrison responded simply that it was not complicated, and any engineer with welding skills could build it. Preston replied that they would have 50 engineers building them, as he wanted every company equipped by tomorrow night. And that commitment launched the doctrine spread that would transform the Normandy campaign and save countless American lives in the weeks ahead.